Terence Mauri, welcome to the conversation today.
Hey, John, great to see you. How are you?
I am great. It is wonderful to be with you. You're joining us from London. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about, a topic that I think is super fascinating. It's right up your wheelhouse. We're going to be talking about leadership, AI, and disruption, and really the combination, the overlap of those areas. As we get started, I wanted to share Terence's bio with everybody. Terence Mauri is one of the world's leading experts and keynote speakers on leadership, AI, and disruption, and he inspires and motivates teams to thrive in ever-changing contexts. Thinkers 50 has described Terence as an influential and outspoken thinker on the future of leadership. And by the way, for those in the audience who don't know, Thinkers 50 is one of the premier organizations that highlight thought leaders throughout the world. So that's a pretty big deal to be highlighted by Thinkers 50. That's really huge. Again, Terence, a pleasure to have you. Anything you'd like to highlight by way of your background, personal context before we dive on in?
I think the number one takeaway for me today is that, as business leaders, as HR leaders, we always overestimate the risk of doing something new and underestimate the risk of standing still. And I look forward to expanding on this hypothesis with you.
Yeah, we do. And in fact, just yesterday, so I'm a university professor. I do consulting work. I have my own consulting business that I've always done on the side. But my main gig, my full-time gig, is I've always been a university professor for the last 17 years. And universities aren't known for like being the most agile and open to rapid change, And
Yes.
so, I go into organizations and I talk to them about transformation and change management and these types of things. But when I'm at the university, I'm doing research, teaching courses, I'm trying to teach these things. But then I beat my head against the wall often as I'm dealing with university bureaucracy. Like I'm trying to move things forward.
Yes. This
It can
word
be
bureaucracy
frustrating.
is it's a really big one actually as well, because I think that we're suffering excess bureaucracy around the world. So the research that I'm working on right now, and bureaucracy is actually going up. 4 billion pieces of paper handled every day. If you walk into a Starbucks, there's over 100,000 different combinations. At City Hall, San Francisco, it takes an average of 252 days to set up a first interview. And we're on average now dealing with over 30,000 emails a year each. And of course, we pay a massive cognitive tax, leadership tax. That's a tax on speed, agility, transformation, because you're spending more of your energy on bureaucratic work rather than intelligent work.
Yeah, we absolutely are. And, you know, as a researcher, as someone who studied the foundations of thought around organizations, I recognize, philosophically, theoretically, I understand why bureaucracy exists. I've read the original thinkers around bureaucracy. I understand why it exists. I understand why policies exist. I understand all of that, right? But in the current world where we need to be agile, where we need to be able to pivot, are we shooting ourselves in the foot
Yes.
when
And
we
is
when
this,
we
yes,
when we build up these bureaucracies too much? And are we,
yes,
I was thinking of, I don't want to go into too much detail here, at my
yes.
home university. I love my home university. It's a great place. But, there are, challenges in relation to bureaucracy and policies that are overly rigid and things like that. And there's a particular issue that I've been dealing with. I'm a department chair, and so I've been dealing with a particular bureaucratic issue. And I'm like, okay, does it even make sense? Like there's this policy related issue that everyone's getting stuck on. And like the common sense, like any reasonable common sense person would look at this and say, this is insane. Yet we're wasting all of this time, all of this energy trying to deal with this issue because of this one little policy thing,
Yes.
literally like one sentence in this one policy. And it's crazy, right? And
It's
yet we
crazy.
we we find ourselves doing that over and over and over again. So can we find a way to prune? Like there are necessary
Yes,
policies, there is necessary compliance, there are things like that we have to pay attention to, but can we prune, can we like pull it back to a to a
yes.
to a reasonable amount where it's what's necessary but not beyond that? That's like the question I'm constantly asking,
It's, yes.
right?
It's a central question that we should be asking ourselves. And are we complexifiers or are we simplifiers? And what I'm particularly interested in is excess bureaucracy. So we acknowledge and we agree that naturally there is bureaucracy with complexity, and we do require a degree of bureaucracy, but it's the excess bureaucracy. The fact, for example, that many best practices have become broken practices. 1 in 3 meetings is considered a complete waste of time. We're dealing with duplicative structures, processes that have gone off like yogurt in the fridge. A big question for our listeners and viewers to think about is, what's my BMI? Not body mass index, bureaucratic misery index. And the answer is it's just too high, okay? It's too high. And I love the word you shared there, pruning, this reductionist mindset. I worked with a global company recently that wanted to basically introduce a reductionist culture. What I mean by that is once a quarter going Marie Kondo, democratizing, so voting for some of the biggest sources of excess bureaucracy, too many meetings, too many processes that should be automated, for example. And then again, in an intentional democratic way, identifying really quick solutions to those complexifiers. And what it led to was more energy, more focus, to focus on the high value work, intelligent work that gives us meaning, rather than that sort of soul-sucking bureaucratic work.
As I think about that soul-sucking bureaucratic work, it really can be, and it's frustrating. I think there's a certain type of person, a certain personality that kind of thrives on that bureaucratic work, but not most people. Like most people, I think they do see it as soul-sucking work, and it distracts them from like what excites them about their normal work, like the things they want to spend their time doing. And so it does become really frustrating, when you want to be doing X, Y, Z, and you end up spending all your time doing, what seems to be just this nonsense stuff that doesn't actually matter. It's not producing anything. It's not creating anything. It's not helping customers. It's not really doing anything. It's just kind of sucking up time. You mentioned meetings, endless meetings, duplicative meetings. We've all experienced that. And so that can be really, really aggravating. I guess my question then is, because you speak a lot in the space around the connection between leadership, AI disruption, we're talking about unnecessary bureaucracy. How can leaders then step forward when they're in an environment of too much bureaucracy? Like, how can they step forward to disrupt that? And how can they utilize things like AI to help them manage when they're trying to disrupt?
Really important questions. I mean, I think great catalytic questions that don't just make us feel good, but make us think hard. And I think, one of my calls to action today is, what are the boldest questions, the bureaucratic busting questions that we should be asking this year? And how do we harness AI to augment what we're great at, but also automate parts of that job, some of those tasks that are routine, repetitive, low value, but take up a lot of time? I think it all starts with context and framing, really taking a scientific approach. So taking a scientific evidence-based approach, looking at your work and breaking it down to first principles, and really understanding which elements of that role at a granular level could be augmented or automated or simplified. And let's remember, even elimination is one of the finest forms of optimization. We have this brain bias against subtraction. We're very good at adding complexity to complexity. And I think one of the big challenges right now, an existential risk for leaders, is that we're drowning in information, we're drowning in data. In fact, the Nobel laureate Herbert Simon said, too much information leads to a poverty of attention. He said that in the 1960s. And one of the big themes right now in terms of answering your question is a lot of information that we have access to is kind of ultra processed. We have ultra processed food. We now have ultra processed content, ultra processed information. It's sugary, It's not clear sometimes. There's a lot of noise, a lot of filtering that you have to go through, and we're spending and wasting a lot of time and energy to get to clarity. And that this is a problem, an existential problem that's getting worse and worse. So a reductionist approach, elimination, simplifying, doing this in a deliberate, intentional, collective way, and harnessing AI in an intelligent way, to take care, to start automating parts of what we do so that we can free up more time to focus on ROI, which is more than return on investment. This is my new human metric for a post-AI world: return on intelligence. Imagine a culture where you're cognitively hardwired to solve the biggest problems in an intelligent way, to solving in a problem-solving way. So return on intelligence, return on ideas, return on imagination. For me, this is the holy grail of where we should be thinking and searching for as leaders.
Yeah. And I love the Holy Grail analogy. I think, because it's important, yet it's kind of elusive, right? Like it's almost this mythical thing that we think, we're striving for. Does it really exist? Can we really find it? Can we really get to it? Like, I actually believe we can. I think we really can get to it.
And we
can
must
find it. And we must find it.
Yes.
Because if we don't, I think of like the largest, most complex organizations out there. Will they be able to self-sustain in this complex environment 10, 20, 30 years into the future? Like, on the one hand, we have this trend towards increased complexity and the super organization, like conglomerates, the super conglomerates, right? So even more and more complexity on the one hand, monopolies and such. On the other hand,
yes.
we need more agility, more and more agility. And even the super conglomerates are so vulnerable to just like the startup, like the tech startup can put
Yes.
the Googles and the Amazons and the Facebooks and the whatevers out of business. So
Yes.
If we don't solve this problem, we may feel that we're immune because we're so big, we're so powerful, we're Apple with billions of cash on hand. We may feel like we're immune, but are we really? Like, as we move into the future, we may have some buffer because we have so much cash on hand, because we have so much clout, because we have so much market share. But we can't rest on our laurels, and eventually, if we don't learn how to adapt, we're going to be in big trouble.
I think it's one of the kind of perennial questions that's keeping leaders awake at night. And my research at Hat Future Lab shows that only 18% of organizations say that they're agile, and that even they are probably exaggerating. I think one of the missing links, one of the big institutional blind spots around the world for large organizations, even small organizations, profit and non-for-profit, is unlearning. And what I mean by that is unlearning in a deliberate, collective, intentional way, really taking a kind of a more of this reductionist perspective on what we're doing and eliminating more effectively to free up more energy, more focus, more bandwidth to focus on the future, not just defending the present. Is that easy to do? No, it isn't. I think we saw with the pandemic, there was an opportunity with Operation Warp Speed, where a lot of the big farmers were able to scale up vaccines in less than 12 months as opposed to 10 years. And a big part of that was this ability to scale a culture of yes. They all became yes and people rather than yes but people. And we've lost a bit of that courage over comfort over the last couple of years since the pandemic. And I think that's the missing link. We need to reconnect with that spirit of yes and rather than yes but.
Yeah, and if we're always the yes but kind of people, then we're always kind of coming from a deficit mentality, right?
Yes. You find 100 reasons not to do it, or not to even experiment and iterate.
Yeah, and yeah, there's always reasons not to do stuff, always. and I have to admit, like sometimes I think we all can fall into that trap, and I've certainly been guilty of that myself. Someone will come up with a cool idea, and I sit back and I'm like thinking of all the reasons it could go wrong, or all the reasons it wouldn't work, or all the obstacles in its way, or whatever. And especially if it's not something that I'm particularly keen on, like I immediately my mind might go to some of those obstacles. Like we can't like be Pollyanna-ish and like put our heads in the sand and ignore the obstacles, but it's a different mindset, right? Like if we just get
It's a different
stuck
mindset.
in the cynicism and like stuck
Yes.
in the obstacles, rather than thinking, okay, let's really think through the opportunities here, the yes ands, then we just approach the problem differently, right?
The expert hat is, it's a safe place. The comfort of certainty is a safe place, and the expert hat is a safe place. And it's, of course, it's got a central part to play in how we create value. But let's not underestimate the power of the beginner's mindset as well. In Japan, they call it shoshin, and a beginner's mindset sees possibilities rather than problems. And the expert mindset, like you said, will find 100 reasons not to even try. And of course, in this world of volatility and risk, compounding disruptions, workforce disruption, tech disruption, actually sometimes not taking a risk is a risk. There's a paradox to this, which is the less risks you take, the less likely you are to take a risk. But actually, that's not a winning strategy when today's the slowest it will ever be in our lifetime, and AI is the slowest it will ever be in our lifetime.
The risk of not taking risks, I see it all the time, and we see analysis paralysis. So
Yes,
people, because they're so afraid of making a mistake, that they just get stuck. And I think well-meaning, well-intentioned leaders,
very well
um,
meaning.
they find themselves in that trap all the time. And so I think this comes back to, again, how I frame things up at the beginning. When we're talking about disruption, it's great to have the mindsets. It's great to have, use the phrases and the terms, and everyone's like excited about disruption. But it takes leadership and it takes courage. And it
Strong,
it
yes.
and it requires you to kind of put yourself out there, because is it safer? Like long term safer? No, because there's risk in not taking risk, right? In the long term. In the short term, is it safer to like not take risk? Is it safer to just kind of take it slow and to not put yourself out there? It can be, because we're such a short-term oriented kind of mentality and culture, that you kind of watch your butt right now and make sure you don't like have some major kind of catastrophic failure in the meantime, and you kind of look like you're okay, right? And it's someone else's problem in the future if you cause some major future problem. And so you have a lot of people that they get stuck in this analysis paralysis, or they're willing to cause future problems to kind of protect themselves in the immediate
I mean,
future. It takes courage. It takes
takes,
real
yes.
leadership for people to
And
lean into disruption, knowing
yes,
that in the immediate the present, the immediate future, they could take a personal hit, right? Like people
yes,
around them
yes.
are going to be uncomfortable. They're going to be people are going to resist the change. They're going to resist the disruption. Nobody, most people don't really like change. They feel vulnerable. They feel they feel like maybe their job's in danger or whatever. And so you as a leader can take a personal hit when you're trying to disrupt, when you're trying to lean into it, when you're trying to upset and disrupt the status quo, and to prune bureaucracy and push back on the norms and the policies, the practices, procedures of an organization that have always been in place. You're
Mm,
kind of that troublemaker if you're doing that,
yes.
and you can be seen as a troublemaker, even though you're trying to help the organization, you're trying to help your team be successful. That takes
Mm.
courage, right?
It takes courage, courage over comfort. And what I mean by that is, cultures of courage embrace ideas or perspectives or new assumptions that challenge the status quo. Cultures of comfort reject ideas or new ways of thinking that challenge the status quo. And the bad news is, once you get to about 1,000 people or more in an organization, they default to cultures of conformity and cultures of courage. Another big reason is the tragedy of the horizon. I shared the stage with Mark Carney, the governor, former bank governor of the UK, Canadian guy, a couple of months ago, and he spoke about the tragedy of the horizon. And what he meant by that was, even as institutional leaders, policy leaders, government leaders that are trying to innovate and really make change, one of the blind spots is if you look at the way that the world is hardwired and rewarded and incentivized, it's very short term. Quarterly earning reports, for example, central bank, again, they're trapped in these very short term, narrow quarterly horizons, which mean that the horizons always, you can't prioritize long-term thinking, long-term change, long-term transformation with short-term horizons. But this is the tragedy of the horizon. And so it's a really interesting blind spot that we can get trapped in as individual leaders or as business leaders. How do we overcome the tragedy of the horizon? And I think, like you said, it starts with courage. Most of the problems we face in the world, climate risk, for example, or talent scarcity, it's not because of a lack of IQ, it's because of a lack of courage.
So we lean into that courage. We lean into a little bit of discomfort. We could become comfortable with discomfort. We become a little bit more comfortable with change. And I'm a big believer that the organizations of the future have to become, they have to, it's not about change management in the traditional sense. Like I'm a change management guy. I've done research in the space. I've consulted in the space for a long time. I don't actually talk about change management the way I did 20 years ago. Like it's about a change mindset. It's about change agility, and it's about a constant culture of change. It's not about a change process anymore, right?
And I think the language.
Yeah,
I mean, the language as well is just it's really interesting. This idea, I like sort of embracing evolution and this kind of spirit of humility over hubris, and this idea of a spirit of embracing evolution as an organization, I think is a sort of really healthy, sustainable attitude of humility, which is a real source code for future readiness.
And the organizations of the future don't go through, every few years they go through a change process, like the traditional kind of mindset around, okay, now we have some new rollout and we have to go through this process. No, it's kind of like we have to have constant readiness for change. We have to have a constant culture of learning and growth, a constant culture of adaptation, a constant culture of experimentation. This is different than how people talked about change 20 years ago, right?
I saw this happen recently with one of the world's biggest luxury companies. And what they've done is they want to pivot from leading from the present to leading from the future. And they started with some billion-dollar questions. And what I mean by billion-dollar questions are, how do we turn mega trends into milestones? What's the sweet spot between strategy, sustainability, and profitability? What are some of these big inflection points and trends that we can get behind and form the business models of the future today? And what they committed to as a leadership team and as a culture is basically 50% of revenue coming from mycelium-based leather, an alternative to traditional leather, by 2030. They formed partnerships with companies like Myco Labs, Silicon Valley-based biotech company, and they're actually scaling mycelium-based leather, which is kind of like a mushroom-based leather, a more sustainable leather and an alternative. And so this is kind of an example of leading from the future, starting with billion-dollar beliefs and really then putting those billion-dollar beliefs to work in an intentional way. And like you said, this is a completely different way of thinking and acting, but it's how you're going to win the future and create a longer-term vitality.
So that adjusting that as a leader to understand that maybe you were a champion for change in the past, but recognizing that we have to lean into it even more in the future, that's vital. Terence, we've only just scratched the surface here, but I do note the time. I need to let you get on with your busy day. I know it's evening for you, actually. You probably have other things to do, get back to your loved ones and such. As we wrap things up for today, I wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, your team, and then give us a final word on the topic for today.
Thank you, John. Well, my call to action, my call to reflection today is, I'll use the words of the famous scientist, Nobel laureate, Marie Curie. She said, in life, nothing is to be feared, only understood. And the more we understand, the less we will fear. But my personal favorite, Ted Lasso, he said, stay humble, stay teachable. And for folks that want to reach out to me and stay connected, I love building communities around the world, ecosystems of trust, ecosystems of inspiration. So terencemauri.com is my website, terencemauri.com. LinkedIn, Terence Mauri, LinkedIn as well is another great way of building a bridge, becoming part of the community. And my new book, The Upside of Disruption, is out on September the 4th. And really, that's a blueprint for this idea that we always overestimate the risk of doing something new and underestimate the risk of standing still. And this book is packed with new ideas and surprising truths, counterintuitive thinking to really help and equip leaders with the mindsets, the choices, and not waste one of the biggest reframing moments in our lifetimes. Because as you said, I think we spend too much time on changing policies and not enough time on changing mindsets.
I love it. Terence, thank you so much. It's just been a real pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Terence can do for you. Check out his previous talks, check out his book, check out all the great materials that he has for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe. They can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day.